Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Two Sons Podcast. I'm your host here, Philip, and in today's episode, we are finally leaving all the movies of summer 2025 behind. And we have a couple of TV shows and movies that came out in the fall. I mean, granted, the one that we're talking about today actually was coming out during the summer and ended early in the fall, so this is technically still summer of 2025. But this is going to be the beginning of looking, past that and going into the fall and the winter of 2025 and discussing some movies that have came out and, obviously some TV shows. So obviously we cover more movies here, but occasionally if a TV show pops up, we do our best to cover it, the same way we would a movie. So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Alien Earth. This series, I believe, came out sometime in July of 2025. And it just wrapped up either the end of August or like very early September. So it's probably been like a month or so since the show has officially stopped for the first season. And yeah, we are going to be discussing that today. So this is definitely a long time coming. This is something that I wanted to do for a while now, but obviously we had a lot of movies to cover in the summer. And yeah, now that I kind of went over all the big ticket movies for the summer, now we can look closer into the fall and touch upon some things that we didn't have the chance to. So that is what we're going to be doing today. Obviously, the rest of the summer and the beginning of the fall has been fairly busy, so that's why I have not posted a episode in a while. But obviously, I'm in my fancy uniform today, so as I wait to kind of go to work and do the closing shift, I thought I'd sit down and record a quick episode for you guys. Try to get some episodes out when I have the free time. That way, I don't really have to worry about it every week and just kind of put it out and just kind of like set it to pre-release and go from there. So while I have the time today, that's what we're going to do. So like I said, today we're going to be covering Alien Earth. So let me see if I can find out when it came out officially real quick. I don't see it. But yeah, let's go over. Obviously, the genre is going to be horror and science fiction. Obviously, Alien Earth is part of the overall Alien franchise. So we're going to be looking at basically what happened in between the first Alien film. Is it the first Alien film, or I think it's right before Romulus, or it happens right after Romulus? I'm not sure. I'm trying to get the timeline because I think Alien Romulus happens right after Alien. So I think this kind of fits somewhere in between. I think this definitely takes place before the first Alien film, because I remember hearing that going in when the show was being talked about. So it takes place like in that area of the timeline. So looking, obviously it was created by Noah Hawley. He is well known for Fargo, and also the TV show Legion. Obviously, what was I gonna say? Some of the cast and crew, we'll get into now. So we have Sydney Chandler playing Wendy. We have Alex Lothal playing Joe Hermit. We got Essie Davis playing Dame Sylvia. We got Samuel Blanken playing Boy Cavalier. We got Babu Sise playing Morrow. We got Ardush Gaurav playing Slightly. Arana James playing Curly. Lily Nemark playing Nibs. Jonathan Aye playing Shmi. David Rochdale playing Arthur Sylvia. And I think that is overall it. Yeah, pretty much. So definitely a couple of new faces, that I am not too sure of. A lot of these actors and actresses I have not seen before. I'm not too literate when it comes to movies and TV shows, so I mean, you guys might recognize some of the names, but unfortunately, going in, these are all people that I'd never seen before, and I think they all gave a very, very exceptional performance. And they really made you fall in love with the characters. And I mean, we'll go into a little bit into pros and cons, but a big pro for this show was how these adult actors were able to portray the mindset and the personality of a kid. Because again, we find out in the show, well, we don't really do too many spoiler reviews. These are mostly spoiler free reviews, so I won't really go into it. But we find out events, uh, you know, coincide in the show, and it kind of you'll see why they're acting like kids in adult bodies, so to speak. But looking back at it, when I do my reviews, I don't really give too much away because I still want you guys to go and check it out for yourselves. So I kind of just do as spoiler free as I could possibly get. But I mean, all you need to know is that they give a phenomenal acting performance, and they definitely nailed it on the head. At least I think. Um, so that's some of the cast and crew. So now that we kind of went over that, well, obviously, even though it's a TV show, they still have scores from some of the big websites like Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, and IMDb. So we're gonna go over those scores, real quick, just to see how the show, fared. Obviously, this is the first Alien TV show that they ever did. Everything in the Alien franchise has either been like video games, light novels, movies. So this was the first real attempt of taking the Alien franchise and putting it in a TV show. So we're going to start with IMDb. IMDb gave it a 7.2 out of 10, which overall is a fairly good average score. And for a TV show, that is huge. Because again, being the first of its franchise, it's definitely a good score to get. From IMDb, getting a 7.2 out of 10 is a fairly good score. Looking at Metacritic now, we see that Metacritic overall gave it about an 85 out of 100, which again, is actually on their website as a must-watch. So that is a huge score. Again, to give for a TV show. We see that overall, there's a lot of mixed reviews. It seems like the fandom is actually pretty split. Taking all the reviews, and then I guess, finding the average, we're sitting at about like a 5.2. So we do see that there are a lot of pros and there are a lot of cons. A lot of people are giving it like 10 out of 10s, 100s, 90s, 85s. But then we have some, fans, as well as some, publishers giving it a 3, giving it a 6, giving it a 50. So it really just depends on, what side of the Alien franchise you kind of fall on, and, what you, think. I mean, overall, we're seeing more of a positive score than a negative score. So looking at it like that, overall, it is a fairly positive show. But we do see that depending on what side of the fandom that you're on, you might have your problems with it, because again, something that Noah Hawley tried to do with this show is that he tried to branch out from the traditional viewpoint of Alien, and go about it in, a much more unique way, So if you are a diehard fan of Alien, and you like your bread and butter, and you like exactly, Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, if you like that storytelling, that bread and butter, you might have not liked this show. If you're a little bit more open-minded and, you were looking for a more unique approach, a different approach to the Alien franchise, this is something that you will definitely like. And again, depending on what side of the fandom you fall on, it's easy to see, some people hating it, some people liking it. Finally, last but not least, we have Rotten Tomatoes. And again, this is actually a very, very good score for Alien Earth, and it definitely has a lot of praise. But again, this is where we kind of see a little bit of a divide. So we see that the critics are giving it about a 94%, and I think it's a very fair score, and that's where it belongs. However, we see that the popcorn meter, as for how, the audience liked it, we only see it at a 66%, which is a little low, again, especially when we looked at IMDb and Metacritic, and those were a lot higher. But overall, again, looking at, the critic score, seeing it at a 94% is definitely a good piece of television. And I think even though the audience score is at a 66, I think it is, important to keep in mind that, again, we see that the fandom is going to be very split depending on, what you like and what you wanted to see in a show like this. So I can understand why the score is so low, but I think if you take all the websites and you take all the scores overall, I think overall it's been a relatively positive show and a lot of positive feedback, which is really important, especially because this is only the first season, and obviously depending on how much viewership they got, what people liked, we'll see if there's a season 2. And I saw as the show was coming out that Alien Earth was already breaking streaming records like over and over and over again. It was an extremely popular show, and depending on how you liked it, I think overall it was a massive success for the Alien franchise and just, the franchise like this as a whole. I mean, again, I know like people like to kind of put like Alien and Predator in the same like franchise or like world building. So again, like seeing success like this, this could open doors to a bunch of other possibilities. So now that we kind of went over, the cast and the scores, obviously, there's no, like, we're not going to go over like budget or like box office because obviously this is a TV show. So it doesn't really make sense to kind of see what the budget was for this TV show if, again, people didn't have to pay to watch it. If you had a subscription, then you did, but you know what I mean. So now that we kind of went over that, now we're going to jump into some of the pros and cons. These are some of the pros and cons that I saw while I was watching it, while, other people, basically what I do is that when I sit down for these videos, I, look online and I kind of compile like a, universal list of like pros and cons of what people liked about it and what people didn't like about it. So obviously we're going to start with the cons because, we always like to end on a good note here on this podcast. So a couple of the cons, going into the show for Alien Earth is the first one is frustrating character decisions. So critics argue that many plot points hinge on characters making implausibly bad choices, which can feel lazy or forced. I don't necessarily agree with this. I think every character had their own specific motive. Again, I don't want to give too much away if, you guys plan on watching it, or if you've already watched it, you know what I'm talking about. But again, the whole prospect of the show is, the main point is that there's a company, right? And this company is basically engineering a new evolutionary step for humanity, right? We know that there's cyborgs, we know that there's synthetics, and there's humans. But what if we could take the human consciousness of a person and put it in a synthetic body? That is basically like the overall plot of this show. And we meet a couple of characters who have obviously gone through this procedure, which is why I said earlier about, kids being in adult bodies, because for some reason, this process is only successful if you do it from a kid, and not a full-grown adult. So we see a lot of these characters still acting like children in adult bodies, which is why, the acting is just so phenomenal by these people, because they are all full-grown adults playing children, or playing children learning how to be adults, which is phenomenal. So I can understand people being frustrated, on decision-making, just because, again, these are children, and I think a lot of people aren't realizing that, even though they're in adult bodies, these are children, and, some of the decisions that they're making, they don't know what the best course of action to do is because they're children, and they still have a lot to learn about life and just morality and values, in general. So yes, I can understand how some of these decisions might frustrate people, and turn people off, but I think going in, you have to realize that, again, a lot of these characters, they are in adult bodies, they look like adults, but they still have the minds and personality of children. So if they make certain rash decisions that just don't make sense, or, whatever, you have to also keep that in mind, and honestly, I can't really think of a time where somebody made the only time that I could think this being very plausible is, I think it's like episode 5, where basically they show you the events that led up to the crash of the USS Maginot, which was the ship that was carrying all the specimens from all different planets, including the Xenomorph. Everybody saw that in the trailers. So it is very Alien, it pays a lot of homage to the very first film. And again, some of those events, some of those choices are very asinine and very stupid, and you sit there and you're like, how can these like specialists, these experts, like be so careless, So I think that episode is really where this kind of like shines the light the most. But again, my only argument to that is these people have been stationed on the ship for decades. They develop a routine, they develop a way of life, and nobody's perfect. Everybody's always going to take shortcuts. Everybody's always going to be lazy. If anything, it just shows even the smartest people in our race, could be just like us. They could be lazy. They could be unbothered. So I think looking at it from that point of view, I think it makes those choices a lot more understanding. And I mean, again, they are still stupid decisions that they make, but it makes a lot more sense. Another one we have here is pacing issues. So some episodes drag or feel uneven, especially when balancing exposition with action. I didn't really think so. I didn't really think that this show had any pacing issues at all. I think they did a relatively good job. I mean, again, episode 5, we all knew was going to be like kind of like a callback, like, oh, this episode is going to focus on what happened on the Maginot that led up to the crash. That's where, again, it definitely could have lost some people. I mean, I think if you would have started maybe the first episode with that episode, I think it would have fixed, most of the pacing issues, or if anything, that was really the only pacing issue that I saw personally. But overall, I think the show does very well when it comes to pacing. So I don't really think this is, too much of a con at all. Another point we have here is lore confusion. So while it tries to simplify the alien mythos, longtime fans may find the detachment from previous canon jarring. Again, this is one of those things where depending on what type of fan you are of the franchise, either you're going to like the new lore and kind of like, the unique take that Noah Hawley is putting on it, or you're going to be like, oh, well, this isn't Alien, so I'm not going to like it. I definitely think you have to take it with a grain of salt, especially if you are a longtime Alien fan. You grew up with the films, you love the lore. I don't think they do anything too unnatural or too unprecedented. But again, it is interesting to see Noah Hawley kind of play with the franchise and put his own spin on things, whether this is practical to the Alien universe or not. I mean, again, going in, I mean, he even said himself that this was not going to be like your typical bread and butter Alien. Like, he was putting his own spin on it, and that's what he was going to do. So again, I think you take this with a grain of salt and you figure out for yourself whether or not you like the choices and, the things that they did in the show, or, if you didn't. I mean, I think some of the things that they did, I think makes a lot of sense just based on logic and technology. But again, you still might not like it. So again, I could definitely see why this is a con, because again, there are going to be those people that are very ride or die and be like, this is not Alien. This doesn't make any sense. I don't like this. That actually couples with our final point, which is basically a mixed fan reaction. So hardcore fans are split. Some love the reinvention, others miss the traditional Xenomorph-centric narratives. Obviously, this show kind of stepped away from the Xenomorph. I mean, we see the Xenomorph plenty of times, throughout the episodes. But it definitely focused on more of the human characters, right? The humans, the synthetics, the cyborgs, and the Xenomorph and the creatures were kind of like behind the scenes. And I think that was a pretty bold approach for Noah Hawley to take. I think it's, because we're always seeing Alien as people, Xenomorph, that's it, but actually getting a glimpse of like, what does Earth look like, in this timeline, what are the major corporations that took over the Earth? How do people feel? How are they running these things? What are they doing? I mean, I think it was fairly interesting to actually see, like, what was going on the ground, before the events of Alien and the rest of the timeline. So again, I think if you're a little bit more open-minded and you're looking for a different take on Alien, I think you're really going to enjoy this. But if you are a very hardcore fan and you love the whole, like, oh, Alien on the ship killing everybody, or, you just love that whole, like, xenomorphic centric, like, the alien is the center of this project and that's it, then you're probably not going to like it too much. And that's okay. I mean, again, everybody has their opinions and everybody, likes what they like. So, if it's just not for you, it's not for you. But if, you are willing to give it a try, I do highly recommend it. That's pretty much it with the cons, though. So I think the biggest cons really just to take away is, mixed fan reactions and some of the lore confusion, and again, that's going to come from depending on what side of the fandom you fall on. Now we're going to talk about some of the pros, and this is where we're going to end. So a couple of the pros that people found, as also myself, is a fresh take on the franchise. So Noah Hawley's approach brings a new flavor to the Alien universe, moving away from convoluted lore and embracing grounded storytelling. So basically, what I just kind of said a couple minutes ago, again, Noel Hawley gives us a new approach. He gives us a fresh approach. Again, the xenomorph, and the aliens are not like front and center. They are like kind of like background characters, so to speak. And instead, it focuses more on like a grounded storytelling approach. It gets you introduced, to a bunch of characters, and the background behind that, the corporations. Again, I mentioned the plot earlier. The plot is not, about like, oh, ship crashes, a bunch of creatures, they escape and they're just killing bunches of people. We're looking at a corporation doing a new experiment and like following, the characters that are involved in this experiment. So, again, I think a fresh take, especially on a well-rounded and historically long franchise such as Alien, is just good for the franchise. I mean, this is how you reinvigorate your franchise. This is how you get younger fans into the franchise to mix with the older veterans. And again, that's what's going to obviously get you your fandom divide. But, in order to keep a franchise as old as Alien going, you have to take risk and you have to like start looking for new, fresh approaches, getting people involved. And, I think they definitely did the right thing with Noah Hawley's approach. Another one, which obviously helps with that, is your strong cast. So features standout performances in Sidney Chandler, Timothy Olyphant, and Essie Davis, adding emotional depth and tension. Again, a lot of these actors going in, not only are they, acting, in a role, but then they're also adults acting like children. And I think they all do a phenomenal role, bringing their own personalities, their own traits. And I think they really do give a very compelling performance. And it definitely is the cast, which makes this show very enjoyable and very watchable. Another aspect we have here is atmospheric horror. So the show recaptures the terrifying essence of classic sci-fi horror with suspenseful pacing and eerie visuals. I think a lot of the scenes involving the xenomorph and the other creatures were pretty horrific. I mean, it was some of the more gory and bloody scenes that we've actually seen with a xenomorph. And I think they were very creative. And there definitely were a couple of episodes where you were kind of like on the edge of your seat and you felt your heart pounding, because it was very suspenseful. And they captured that element really well in the show. So when the creatures were on screen, they definitely did a service. So it was very well done. Another one is high production value. So cinematography, set design, and effects are top tier, making Earth-based setting feel immersive and unsettling. So a lot of the shots that were on, Earth were actually on Earth. They were in Thailand. Those were sets that were like, built and, produced. And I think the show is beautiful. Again, the cinematography, the set design, the effects are all top tier. I think the creature designs are phenomenal. I know some people are kind of like iffy about the xenomorph. I like the xenomorph. I do agree with people in a sense where it should have been a little darker, like a little bit more black, a little bit more wet, kind of, slimy in a way, like, that we've seen in like, previous Alien projects. But again, I mean, the cinematography and just the way they shot these scenes just made it feel very immersive and unsettling. And that's what added to some of that atmospheric horror as well, because you felt very immersed in it and it made you unsettled. Finally, we have critical acclaim. So it boasts a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, with many calling it one of the best sci-fi shows of 2025. So again, it definitely does help that there are critics out there that are giving it a very high praise, and a lot of these publishing sites are giving it very good scores. And I think overall, looking at any of the sci-fi shows that happened in 2025, I think this one definitely does take the cake. It was a great watch. If you have Hulu, I highly suggest watching it. If you're a fan of Alien, I highly suggest watching it. Again, depending on what side of the fandom you fall on, you might enjoy it, you might not, but I definitely do think it's worth a watch, and you might be surprised. Overall, I think I would give the show probably a solid 9 out of 10. I mean, there were some minor problems that I had with it, but I don't think it was really anything that wasn't covered here. Overall, I think it's a great show. I think it's a very unique take and a very original take for the Alien franchise. I think Noah Hawley does a phenomenal job with that. I think it allows younger people like myself and maybe even younger to kind of get into the franchise and like kind of like rebirth the franchise. I mean, obviously Alien Romulus was kind of like the catalyst, and then now you have Alien Earth. We're having another Alien Isolation game, and then we're making a sequel to Alien Romulus. So, and then, just recently we had Predator, like an animated Predator movie come out on Hulu, which I heard was phenomenal. We're having Predator Badlands come out in November. So this franchise, these worlds as a whole, are definitely getting boosted in popularity. And again, I do definitely think it's worth the watch. But that is going to do it for today's episode, guys. So that was me covering Alien Earth. So that was kind of like the final summer project of 2025 that I'm going to discuss. In the next couple episodes that I do, I'll be going over some movies that I saw, this fall, such as The Roofman, The Conjuring, The Last Rites, Tron Ares, Demon Slayer, and a couple more projects. So, like I said, when I have the time, I'm going to try to record episodes here or there. Please bear with me. I do my best to try to get episodes out weekly. But like I said, just keep those notifications on. Follow me on social media at Instagram and TikTok at Two Sons Podcast, with an O, not a U, because we are two brothers. So just keep the notifications on. You'll be notified when an episode posts. And then if you want to watch, check me out on YouTube at Two Sons Podcast. Again, that's with an O, not a U, because we are two brothers. So episodes come out every Monday around noon. I do my best to try to post the social media along with the video, but sometimes I get stuck at work or I forget, so it gets posted a little bit later. But usually if I record an episode, it happens around noon on Monday. So just, again, check your notifications, check the sites. And thank you guys so much for coming out to another episode. When I see you again, I hope you have a great day, great afternoon, great evening. Please be safe. Don't do anything stupid. Fall is upon us. Enjoy your pumpkin spice, enjoy your fall flavors. We're only like a week away from Halloween, so if you are going out, please be safe. Don't do anything stupid, and enjoy spooky season. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye for now.